Optimus Prime has been the face of the Transformers franchise ever since the first episode of the G1 cartoon, which debuted back in 1984, and his personal Ion Blaster has become just as iconic over the years as the character himself, with adaptations and references being made to it throughout the franchise's history. But for so long, people could only ever see the weapon on screen, and the damage it could do, until High Moon Studios allowed the player to freely use its power for themselves. Today, I will be discussing the evolution of the Ion Blaster, or as it would later become, the equally iconic Path Blaster. The War for Cybertron Ion Blaster is potentially the most iconic weapon in the game, alongside Megatron's fusion cannon. It was shown off as early as the beta builds of the game, and remained largely unchanged until the final launch of the game. The general shape of the weapon will look at home to any fan of the G1 cartoon, as it is recognizably blocky, with a long barrel like its G1 counterpart. However, the protrusions above and below the weapon have been slimmed down to create a more flatter profile for the weapon, allowing it to replace the character's arm like the rest of the weapons in War for Cybertron and Fall of Cybertron do. Well, as I should say, almost all the weapons, but we'll get to that in a future video. Sure, the weapon looks great, but how does it feel? Well, the Ion Blaster is potentially one of the most powerful all-around weapons in the game. It possesses the fire rate of a submachine gun, while maintaining equivalent if not superior accuracy to the Neutron Assault Rifle, even during sustained fire. While it isn't the best at long ranges, often being beaten out by the Null Rays or even in close range by the Scatter Blaster, it truly excels in the medium range, with its 50-round magazine allowing for plenty of sustained engagements with Decepticons. An interesting quirk of the weapon in campaign is that it is used exclusively by Optimus Prime, one of only 2 weapons in the campaign which cannot be used by other characters. The weapon is also unable to be swapped out as Optimus Prime, limiting the player to only the choice of one single extra weapon throughout the level. However, despite Optimus being permanently glued to this weapon, the player is usually blessed with enough ammo and the weapon is able to carry the player through most engagements just fine. But what about outside the campaign? The Ion Blaster is available for the leader class characters in multiplayer, and can be freely unequipped to make room for a secondary weapon, unlike in campaign. The weapon performs rather well in multiplayer, as it's a well-rounded weapon to take with you as a leader, while also keeping a more specialized weapon, like a magnetic grenade launcher, as your secondary. The Ion Blaster performs so well in multiplayer, in fact, that it is used by almost every single leader class main who used to play the game. Unfortunately, War for Cybertron multiplayer in 2025 is like a post-nuclear barren wasteland in terms of player population. Not like Fallout levels of Wasteland, think more Stalker. Yet somehow the game still has more players than Destiny 2. Anyway, the Ion Blaster has gathered a kind of cult following among the War for Cybertron multiplayer crowd, as it's become easily the most reliable all-around weapon to take with you, and really makes the leader class a viable option for multiplayer. But how does it perform in escalation? Shockingly enough, Optimus Prime's signature weapon is seemingly vacant from the escalation game mode, with there being no terminals offering its purchase on any of the maps. The weapon's exclusion from the mode is odd, though I believe it could have been due to balancing reasons, mainly that the weapon might have been too reliable to use against hordes of Autobots and Decepticons in the wave-based multiplayer mode. Overall, players really liked the Ion Blaster, as it found its place rather comfortably in the main slots of loadouts of Autobots and Decepticons in both the campaign and in multiplayer. However, when looking to the future, High Moon Studios saw changes on the horizon, and one of the biggest changes would soon befall this iconic weapon. When Fall of Cybertron was first revealed with the infamous Humbling River trailer, one of the only weapons that would end up being seen in the trailer was the new and improved Ion Blaster. For those of you who have played Fall of Cybertron, you might be confused by me calling this weapon the Ion Blaster, but indeed, the Path Blaster's naming only came later on in development. As for the majority of Fall of Cybertron's development, the Ion Blaster remained in the game. The weapon also underwent 2 notable designs throughout development. one of which can be seen in Optimus Prime's concept art, along with the Optimus Prime toy. This iteration of the weapon more closely resembles the G1 design for the Ion Blaster, with a very tall stature and its noticeable protrusions which align closely with the silhouette of the original weapon. This version of the weapon could be seen throughout most of Fall of Cybertron's concept arts, before being replaced with the final version of the weapon that we would later see in-game. The final version of the weapon is a whole lot more flatter, and the extremities have been smoothened down to provide a far more sleek design for the weapon. Along with its design change, the name for the weapon would also be overhauled, with the Ion Blaster now being renamed to the far more menacing Path Blaster. An interesting piece of lore about the Path Blaster is that the weapon is actually a modified orbital pistol, one of the weapons from War for Cybertron, but combined with certain parts from the original Ion Blaster to upgrade the weapon's offensive capabilities. Essentially, after the War for Cybertron campaign, almost all of the Ion Blasters were disassembled, and the newer models of orbital pistols were refitted with the Path Blaster upgrades. It's a super neat example of the progression in technology on Cybertron between the games, and has some amazing lore surrounding it. But so what if it has a new name and an interesting backstory? How does the weapon actually perform in-game? Well, along with the host of changes made by the name, and the look of the weapon, it actually performs entirely differently than the original Ion Blaster. The Path Blaster is no longer the SMG archetype weapon, and now fires in semi-automatic precision shots which deal a good amount of damage. The weapon fires highly dense molten slugs. For reference, that round is the equivalent to the same round fired by bolters in Warhammer 40k, so quite deadly indeed. The weapon is frequently used by Optimus Prime in the campaign, along with being one of the very first weapons you have unlocked in the Teletran Terminal by default. As for the Teletran Terminal, you can of course purchase weapon upgrades throughout the campaign, turning this already quite powerful weapon into an even more reliable instrument of destruction. The Hyper Interlink speeds up reload time by 50% and costs 2,400 Energon shards, a must-have attachment for the weapon throughout any playthrough. The Quantum Stabilizer completely removes recoil for the weapon, and costs 2,100 Energon shards. While it sounds useful, it's not very noticeable on a semi-automatic weapon, though its price does justify its purchase. The Tachyon Transmitter increases movement speed while aiming by 50%, and is available for only 1,050 Energon shards. A very mobile and useful upgrade for the weapon. The Gambler is an incredibly unique upgrade, and is available after purchasing all other weapon upgrades. It chooses one round in the magazine to overheat and create an uber-powerful shot. Overall, the weapon is really quite good in campaign, and a popular strategy with the weapon is to melee an enemy and finish them off while they're on the ground. A brutal but effective strategy, which I feel really highlights this weapon's purpose. You see, the Path Blaster isn't going to take you all the way off Cybertron and to the stars by itself. You've got to think tactically about how you use the weapon, pairing it with melees, abilities, and the environment to get the most out of the weapon. And nowhere is that more prevalent than in the multiplayer. The Path Blaster is available for the Infiltrator class in Fall of Cybertron's multiplayer, and is commonly found as a secondary weapon among players. You see, the Infiltrator class really benefits from possessing some of the most powerful weapons in the game, with the Scatter Blaster, Nucleon Charge Rifle, and Subsonic Repeater all being available for the Infiltrator class. Each one of these weapons are beyond useful, as they are almost all power weapons. When you have access to the shotgun, a sniper rifle, and an SMG, a semi-auto precision rifle doesn't seem like the most viable option. However, the Path Blaster is able to be paired with these other more specialized weapons almost perfectly. You see, the Subsonic Repeater and Scatter Blaster are really useful for close range, and the Nucleon Charge Rifle is best at long-range engagements. But if you're paying attention, you'd notice that the Infiltrator has no access to mid-range weapons. Except, that's exactly where the Path Blaster places itself, as the perfect mid-range weapon. While most players will choose a specialized weapon that fits their playstyle, like the Scatter Blaster for up-close rushes, or the Nucleon Charge Rifle for long-distance sniping battles, almost every Infiltrator keeps a Path Blaster in their back pocket as a more generalized weapon that can get them through most engagements, while their primary is out of its element. Of course, the Path Blaster isn't perfect, but it can come close to that within Fall of Cybertron's attachment system. So let's get into those upgrades. The Magma Dispenser decreases the weapon's spread cooldown time. Translating that from Iacona to English, it decreases the weapon's bloom. If you don't know, bloom is the in-game subsystem which makes your shots less accurate the faster you fire. The upgrade is actually really useful for the weapon, as many players tend to use the weapon at mid-range encounters where they're caught off guard, and as such, are firing quite frequently. This attachment is responsible for hitting so many headshots back in my day, so I'd absolutely recommend it to players. The Sonic Blast increases the weapon's rate of fire, allowing players to use the weapon in a sort of full auto mode. Sure, it sounds useful, but why are you just not taking the subsonic repeater if you want a faster firing rate? While not being too bad of a choice, as the weapon is still rather precise compared to the other choices, there are better attachments to use than this one. The infamous Lights Out attachment is basically just the Gambler upgrade from Campaign, but now it can be used in multiplayer. A useful glitch for this attachment is that if you do not utilize the last uber powerful shot before you reload, the Super Shell will be loaded higher up in the magazine, enabling the player's second or even third shot to distribute the massive damage shell. This is by far the most useful upgrade for the weapon, and myself and many others choose this attachment over the other two. Overall, the Path Blaster is actually used quite a bit, despite being available alongside more powerful weapons. Many players have found themselves adoring the weapon, and the Path Blaster quickly became a must-have weapon in any infiltrator's loadout. Now, you might think that the Path Blaster just can't get any better. It's a good precision primary against small squads in PvE, and it's a great fallback weapon in PvP. But what if I told you that it gets even better? In Fall of Cybertron's Escalation mode, the Path Blaster is available on every single map, with the player either spawning with the weapon already equipped, like on Ignition, or being able to purchase it for 400 Energon shards on every other map. The weapon is truly great against the hordes of enemies, especially in Ignition, where it feels like a great holdout weapon. It's not the most powerful weapon, but its general mid-range damage combined with the ability to stun close-range, smaller enemies with melee makes the weapon truly shine in Escalation. If it weren't for the Riot Cannon on some maps, the Path Blaster would probably be the weapon most associated with Fall of Cybertron's Escalation mode. Now, you might assume that this would be the peak of the Path Blaster's height, with the weapon completely overshadowing its counterpart in War for Cybertron. But what if I told you that this wasn't the end of the road? What if I told you that the Ion Blaster actually would make its triumphant return in Fall of Cybertron, with a much more faithful appearance than previously? In Fall of Cybertron's campaign, there exists a truly legendary weapon, available after purchasing the Massive Fury DLC, the Glass Gas Cannon. It's available for free at all Teletran terminals throughout the campaign. This weapon is a beautiful recreation of Optimus Prime's iconic G1 ion cannon, complete with the heavy gravity-defying damage of a true power weapon. The Glass Gas Cannon is prominently featured in the G1 Retro Optimus trailer, and pairing the skin with the weapon truly lets the player live out their G1 fantasies. The weapon is a fantastic choice, however, the limitation of heavy ammo makes the weapon less viable than the Path Blaster in campaign. Though that didn't stop players around the world from falling in love with the iconic weapon. Though the Glass Gas Cannon isn't available in multiplayer or Escalation, it's still fondly remembered by players as one of the most unique yet recognizable weapons in the game. And with that, the evolution of the Ion Blaster, and later the Path Blaster, and even the Glass Gas Cannon, is now complete. I'd like to thank you all so much for the support on this new series, and I'm looking forward to continuing it alongside Lore for Cybertron. Let me know in the comments which weapon you'd like to see me do a video on next, and also vote in the upcoming YouTube poll tomorrow. Thank you all for watching, till all are one.